The Nina and Mark Show. We will keep you in the know. Current events and special guests. Our podcast is the best. You don't want to miss the Nina and Mark Show.
Welcome to our podcast. My name is Nina Deeb,
My name is Mark Carbello.
and today we're going to be talking about rent control, and we're going to be talking about vacant apartments. So rent control is a very important topic because it affects everybody. Housing affects everybody.
Well, pretty well everybody who's in the housing market owns a home, wants to rent. Everything seems to be going a little bit sideways, and we're glad Nina is here as the absolute expert to explain to us what is going on out there.
Well, rent controls have been dropped, so anything built after November 15th, 2018 has no rent control on it. The rents can go up anything.
It's just astounding. Where does this start?
Started with the province of Ontario. Immediately, as soon as we had a change in government, they immediately removed rent control. And the rent control removals have made it worse. Housing affordability is so much worse, like it's visible to the naked eye. See that more and more people are becoming homeless every single month. It's benefiting corporations that they're financial landlords, and that's who's pretty much exempt now from rent control.
This is one of the strangest things. Legislation is it's not favoring people, particularly in housing. Doesn't seem to be much of a benefit these days to regular Canadians who want to either get into the housing market or the rental market. It's everything, just like our last topic, seems to be shrinkflation as well. Do you have any numbers on how many vacant apartments are available here in the Waterloo region, and what is going on with that?
It's a great question. And I'm noticing that a lot of our new buildings that have been built that don't have rent control on them, that they're dark towers. And the dark towers are not helping with our housing crisis. So we have units, but the units are being wasted because they're not in touch with the market. They're overpriced. They're not realistic, and this isn't how the market works. The market, if something is too high, the price should be adjusted for it. But these landlords have more than just rental income. They're publicly traded, so they can fund through public offerings as well. So when a landlord can do that, and when they can control enough of the rental stock, they can afford to keep units vacant for a year, 2 years, or for however long they like, because they're effectively raising the rents on the rest of their units. So the units being vacant, if rents doubled and if you have 20% vacancy, you're still 30% ahead. So the rents, the vacancies don't affect them that much, but it does affect the end users, and it does affect the rental market that you're in. The Waterloo region has, so 2 years ago, three corporate landlords had acquired 4% of our purpose-built rental stock had been acquired by just three companies.
There clearly is no benefit other than the benefit of the corporations, the people that are investing in real estate. But there certainly doesn't seem to be much benefit for regular people that just want to get into the market or get into a rental. And on top of that, what is happening with rentals? Is everything turning into a mortgage condominium these days?
Actually, some of our purpose-built rental stock has been converted to condos. So I can think of 3 here in Cambridge that have been converted to condominiums, and they were purpose-built rentals. So when we're losing stock that way, like from the rental stock is being diminished, the new rental stock that's replacing it has no rent control, and the old rental stock is being converted to condominiums and being sold off.
So we're in a market right now where we have a lack of rental units, affordable rental units, and what they're classifying as affordable doesn't seem realistically affordable. Purposeful building and land. What is happening with that? I understand that there's a situation in the Lang's Farm area, townhome units, and there's a rebuild going on. Can you give us some insight onto where that is headed and what that project is going to look like and how it's going to affect the local community?
So there was 38 affordable townhomes that were on Lanes Drive across from William G. Davis School. They were built in late 60s, early 70s. And those townhouses they had backyards and basements, and they were torn down. And the building that's going up was supposed to be 136 units, is what we were told. And the latest number I see that on that is almost 100 units. The number of units have shrunk from what I see. So we have shrinkflation before it's even built. So the 38 units they were good for families actually, because they were at least 3 bedrooms. I think some of them were even 4 bedrooms. So they were very good for families. And what's being replaced with is an apartment building with no balconies. And it could have been built. There was land available for this building. We could have built it down the street. So it isn't that we couldn't have had the building and had the townhouses too. We could have had both. And that's one of the shortfalls I see. No one else would tear down 38 townhouses that are, say 50 years old, except for the taxpayers' assets. Only the taxpayers' assets get torn down like this. Like no other landlord would say, I'm going to tear these down and just, but we do. We tear down what we already have and we replace it with something totally different. I'd like to have had both.
Well, it doesn't make any sense. We're in a housing crisis. It doesn't make any sense to tear down any housing at this point for any purpose, particularly here in Cambridge or any region. I know that just driving in the area, there is a lot of housing development going on and builds, but to know that we're in a bit of a crisis, we have tent cities that are popping up. And that housing availability is essential for a lot of families and people these days, and it seems to be going in the opposite direction with corporations. Would you say that greed is at the top of that priority? Is it all about the money? Do we have any humanity left in us to consider, the needs of people?
I don't think that corporations that are built for profit and that must return, they have to return profits to their lenders, to their investors. So their shareholders, the shareholders have no interest in the Canadian housing being affordable for us. The affordability of housing for Canadians contradicts what they're trying to do. They want maximum profits. So maximum profits out of Canada's housing is a terrible idea, and our housing should never have been subjected to have profits squeezed out of it like this. Like the corporations have moved into Canada. They're renting their renters, the Canadian renters. They're renting them out, and they're just squeezing and squeezing and squeezing. And our government has assisted. Like the province of Ontario, property rights and rent regulations and rental protections are all provincial. This is provincial jurisdiction, and the province, the new government got to work right away in removing controls for these corporations. I would say the government is legislating for corporations, not for individuals. The individuals get to pay, the corporations get to profit, and the corporations are subsidized by all Canadian taxpayers. So we've removed HST off of purpose-built rentals. So these high-rise that are sitting with vacancies, some of them are admitting 20% vacancy because they're putting it on their signs. I've seen a few of those. They're saying we're 80% occupied. I'm like, well, you're 2 years old and you're 80% occupied. Therefore, you are 20% vacant. So
Hmm.
I'm looking at a lot of buildings and they look very vacant to me. And my question, what we have to be asking is how many vacant, unaffordable apartments are sitting in Ontario right now? So we're building less than we've ever built. These are the lowest housing starts in history when you take into account population growth for Ontario. Lowest housing starts in history, and how much of the new housing stock, the purpose built rental housing stock, is vacant because it's priced out of the markets.
So I don't want to refer back to legislation and the government. For the average person, that's out there in the rental market or the housing market, we seem to be disconnected with the process of these bills being passed. You would certainly think in this type of housing, which I would consider to be a crisis, uh, that there would be some type of vote or some type of acknowledgement of, you know, legislation being passed in the favor of corporation or shareholders or whomever it is that's in the housing market, uh, above people, kind of sneaking in the back door with legislation to allow people to come in without regulation, as you mentioned, for since what was that, November of 2018. That's quite a move. Well, obviously not in the favor of people. What is the process? Is this all top down? Are we looking at how does the process work? Is it governments that are hand in hand with corporation? And just give us some insight on how that all kind of trickles down to the consumer and the home owner or buyer.
Because we have a majority government, they can pass anything that they'd like to pass. So the consultation process is, even that's completely bypassed sometimes, that we have no hearings. Even the hearings are canceled. So the number of seats, I think they have 80 seats. The current party in power has 80 seats. So it doesn't matter if the other parties vote against whatever it is that they're passing, they can pass without any criticism, very little criticism. And then they just shut down Queen's Park, they shut down discussions, they shut down the sittings. They're not sitting now again. They don't sit more than they sit. There was a comment about how the premier said how people on disability need to get off the couch. And I'm thinking, do you know who the people on disability are? Like, do you know what disability means? So some people on disability can't even move, like they're absolutely immobile. And to say, hey, you should get off the couch, like, well, I would if I could move. But you obviously don't understand the situation. So
I think
it's
that's a
very hard it's very hard to digest this kind of ignorance.
absolutely. It first of all, it is a lot, and to have that such a disconnect between government and people, and blatantly to Canadians. We listen to the Canadians. We're doing everything to provide for the Canadians, but I don't think that's necessarily what's happening at all. I think it's quite the opposite for most Canadians. I would suspect that there's a lot of struggle going on for a lot of Canadians, and certainly around housing is uh, a big issue with that. So, is there what what is the solution? Like, what's the answer? How do we get back legislation that's fair and just for people? How do we get? It almost seems like we need a whole new process.
So the what municipalities are trying to do, what some municipalities are, they're talking about vacancy tax, and Toronto has actually brought in a vacancy tax. This is a very bad idea. It's not the answer at all. So, vacancy tax, the onus is on the existing home residents to say every year, year after year, I reside in my home, don't tax me the vacancy tax. So the onus is falling on Nona that's been sitting in her house for, 50, 60 years, that if she doesn't declare that she's living in her home every year, that she's going to get automatically nailed with this vacancy tax. So it's really created it's put everybody, all of Toronto has to jump on these hamster wheels now, because corporations are leaving properties vacant. So this really, it's not individuals that are leaving properties vacant. The dominant bad actor that's leaving properties vacant are the financial landlords. So they're literally advertising it. They're marketing and advertising this vacancy on their signs. They think they look good when they say, "Oh, we're 70% occupied." Well, that means you're 30% vacant. Oh, we're 80% occupied. That means you're 20% vacant. So all these high rises that have hundreds of units, if they're all 20 or 30% vacant, there's the missing housing right now that we're looking for. So they have put these units in reserve by overpricing them. We've created a reserve system within Ontario. So how many new rental units that have no rent control on them are sitting vacant in reserve? I think there's so many sitting vacant, and the vacancy tax, we're going after the people that have been, like Toronto, going after existing residents for vacancy tax when it's the corporations that have the dark towers. Like my grandma and grandpa aren't sitting there with dark towers in their little bungalow that you want to charge a vacancy tax to them on if they don't tell you every year they're living there. But the corporations they've got thousands of units of it, not rented, that the market has rejected. So these units have been rejected by the market. The market has said, no, your price is too high, and they can just fund through public offerings because they have other funding streams that the regular people don't have. Like individuals don't have these funding streams. And then the taxpayers are subsidizing them. They're not paying HST on these purpose-built rentals that are being built. They can waive their development charges, and they're getting preferential interest rates from our federal housing corporation funding streams that we should have for individuals, or to give Canadians a break on entry-level homes. Or we could be building social housing with this, and then we own it. So from the perspective of social housing, whether you're for it or not for it, we can either pay for it and own it, or we can subsidize it and then the corporations can own it. And that's what we're doing now. So we're not owning what we're paying for. We're subsidizing it so much, and it's being, the asset isn't ours. It's not our asset. And it's being priced out of the market to the point the vacancies are sitting there 20-30%. This is beyond, this is a ludicrous situation, and nobody would think this is a good idea. It's a bad idea. It's a bad idea.
How is it possible to be able to afford things when you're just taxed on top of taxes? And particularly in housing, you were mentioning in our conversation earlier that with insurance, mandates with purchasing of housing for insurance, and all these things are, there's taxation, there's insurance, there's all these kinds of things going on. What is the average cost right now for just a one-bedroom apartment or a two-bedroom apartment? Because back in my day, it seems we're almost doubled or tripled what a mortgage payment used to be. What is the cost these days on average for a one or two bedroom apartment?
One bedroom starts at $1,700, but the one bedroom has really shrunk. So the new one bedrooms are like 400 and something square feet. And the two bedrooms are, some of them are 600 and something square feet. So the one bedroom and two bedroom isn't the one bedroom and two bedroom it used to be. It's maybe half the size. So shrinkflation has also happened within the size of the units. And then development charges. So municipalities are setting up development charges to change depending on square footage. So if the builder's building a really like a bachelor or one bedroom, the development charges are lower. So we're building the wrong type of housing. We're building luxury rental housing that nobody wants, that nobody can afford. Very few people can afford it. So that's creating vacancies. Those are out of touch. Those are out of the market. They're out of this world. So that wouldn't happen if we had rent control. So rent
Mhm.
control has permitted these vacancies, like vacancies out of control, to happen. And then why would we subsidize the bad actors? So you look at something and say, here you have something, not just that, they're not paying taxes on these rents. So they hoover up all these rents and they're a tax exempt landlord because they're a real estate investment trust. So it's treated totally different from taxation purposes. And the federal government was talking about taxing the real estate investment trusts, and everybody came out. So the entire development industry came out in their defense of, oh no, you can't tax them. And I'm the
Mm.
only person saying, yeah, we should be taxing them because this isn't helping anyone. And Canadians don't have a responsibility to global shareholders for them to profit. And
Right.
our housing should not have been surrendered in this way. Housing is very important, so we shouldn't have put our housing affordability on the chopping block and permitted corporations to push Canadians outside, to push Canadians to live outside in encampments because they are here and they're extracting and they're not contributing anything. So these overpriced units that they claim to be contributing, no thanks. We don't need your overpriced units. Why don't you go home to the country you pay taxes to?
My goodness, yes. I wanted to go back just a little bit too about the housing, as far as shrinkflation is concerned. You know, people need a backyard. People need a place to park a car. You know, they need a balcony. You know, these are somewhat what I'd like to consider like parts of, you know, your birthright on the planet. You know, we shouldn't be squeezing people and into high rises, you know, where your neighbors are overcrowded and all around you, and you have no uh, there are very little natural space. It seems like, okay, we'll put up these high rises, we'll condense everybody in here. You know, if it's the holidays and you want to have a guest over to your house, well, we don't have any extra parking for any of that. And it just seems to be so uh, counteractive for someone to live in a space and feel like they're at home. Do you know what I'm saying? Like it's like these housing developments. I know that there's one off of Speedsville Road here in Cambridge. It looks very nice, but is it practical? Is it really working for people uh, to have that stack housing going on? What's your viewpoint on that? Like, shouldn't we be more considerate about people's needs as far as what they need in a like we don't need to be shrinking things any smaller is what I'm saying, or providing uh less to for the price of what we're paying.
So, like the building that's going up on Lanes Drive, you make a very good point. Like that building's, the remarks I'm hearing about it, about the drawings, and people are making comments about how municipal housing, social housing, how it's not attractive. The building's unattractive and it has no balconies, and it's built right on. I think it's right on the road. It looks like right on this lot line. And the comments were that people were happy that it's not attractive. And I say, so like this is our asset, and we're happy it's not attractive because it's social housing. And I think why wouldn't we want people to have balconies or a backyard, or to have a little bit of enjoyment in their home, to have, some dignity, to be able to barbecue, to be able to, like, why do we want to hold these things back from people, from other people, to not because it's too expensive, but because we just don't want you to have it. That's how I feel about that. And social housing is generally unattractive, and it makes me sad that we would take our own asset like this and say, I'm just going to make it an ugly color, or I'm just going to give it no appeal, or let it, or it just looks like
Hmm.
matchbox housing or whatever. Why are we doing this? Why can't we have some pride in this and say, we want it to look good, we want it to last more than 50 years, like the last one that we tore down in that location. We want it to last longer, and we want it to look good. And just because the taxpayers paid for this, it doesn't mean it should be ugly.
Hmm. And that's another point too. We have perfectly beautiful uh, buildings that could be repurposed for housing, and we have all kinds of opportunities to reinvent what is happening right now and improve it and make it better for Canadians and Ontario. Uh, are we Ontarians? I guess that's the word.
Yeah.
So it's like, why? Why are we making these decisions? Like all money-based decisions when we should really be focusing on needs. It should be obviously affordable, and it should be a reasonable place to live and call home. These things should be a priority for any builder or any, there has to be some type of benchmark to get to that level and keep that going. From me working in long-term care for the number of years that I did, even in that type of housing, or it's not even housing, but I mean, we can do better. We can do better. We can make better decisions. I think the loophole here is that we're actually out of the loophole, or we're not part of the process. This is all top-down stuff that's coming from in legislation, and it's coming through the back door in the middle of the night, and we're not aware of all these things. And I think that as a majority of the people, if given a vote on restructuring, are in a housing crisis, and we are tearing down buildings, you know what I mean, that could be repurposed. I guess that is pretty well where what my point is. It's disappointing.
Well, Mark, you brought up some excellent points there. We do have to wrap this up because we're already at over 30 minutes.
For sure.
But you brought up an excellent point about long-term care beds and long-term care, and you had said long-term care is not housing. Long-term care beds are being counted as a house. So that
Okay.
the long-term care, so the province of Ontario has decided to count long-term care beds as houses built because they're fudging the numbers. And that's one of the things that I've brought up. It's like, you can't count these as homes. You can't redefine what a home is and start counting these, but they've started counting long-term care beds. So that's a very good conversation for another time, because I've looked into that. But for now, I think that we should wrap this up and bring that up again on maybe one of our other topics on another day.
I agree. So much to discuss. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. We hope you got some insight into housing, and we hope to see you again on our next podcast.
See you again soon. Thank you for joining us.
I know.
The Nina and Mark Show. We will keep you in the know. Current events and special guests. Our podcast is the best. You don't want to miss The Nina and Mark Show.